Was I wrong for what I did?
My own son, the boy I raised, the one I poured my heart and soul into, beat me up. He laid hands on me, his elderly father, simply because the soup I made for him didn't have enough salt. The sting of his slap, the pain in my ribs where he shoved me, it's nothing compared to the deep, shattering wound he carved into my heart that day. I'm still reeling, still trying to make sense of how a child I loved so fiercely could turn into such a monster. Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same thing, because I honestly don't know if I can live with myself for what I did next, but I also don't know how I could have lived with myself if I hadn't. It all started so simply, as most heartbreaks do. My life before that day was quiet. Content, mostly. I'm a widower. My wife, bless her soul, passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with illness. It left a void, a silence in the house that I never quite got used to. But I had my son, Mark. He was my only child, and after his mother passed, I focused all my remaining energy, all my love, on him.
He was a good kid, or so I thought.
He had always been a little hot-headed, a bit entitled, but I always excused it as youthful exuberance, a strong personality.
I told myself he'd grow out of it. He'd mature.
He was working a decent job, a supervisor at a local factory, and he had a fiancée, Sarah, a sweet girl who seemed to genuinely care for him, and for me. I was looking forward to their wedding, looking forward to being a grandfather someday.
My pension isn't much, but it's enough to get by.
I live in the house my wife and I bought together, a modest place, but full of memories. Mark, after a particularly nasty breakup with a previous girlfriend that left him temporarily homeless, moved back in with me about 2 years ago. I welcomed him with open arms, of course.
He was my son. I worried about him out there alone.
I saw it as a chance to bond, to help him save up for his own place, perhaps for a down payment on a house with Sarah.
It wasn't always easy. Mark was messy and demanding.
He rarely helped with chores, left his dirty dishes in the sink for days, and expected me to cook and clean up after him. I found myself slipping back into a routine I thought I'd left behind when he moved out for college. But I grumbled quietly, told myself it was temporary, that he was under stress, that he'd appreciate it later. He paid a small amount of rent, enough to cover his share of the utilities, but it certainly wasn't market rate. I wasn't looking to profit from my own son, just to have a bit of help with the bills. Sarah visited often, and she was always so polite, so helpful. She'd offer to do dishes, help me with gardening, and sometimes even bring groceries. I loved her like a daughter, and often wondered why she put up with Mark's moods. She tried to talk to him, gently, about helping more around the house, about being kinder to me. He'd just brush her off, or sometimes snap at her too. It always made me uncomfortable. This particular day, the day everything changed, started like any other Tuesday. I had spent the morning pottering around the garden, something I enjoy immensely. The sun was warm, and I felt a sense of peace. I had decided to make Mark his favorite soup for dinner, a hearty chicken and vegetable soup, just like his mother used to make. I even used her old recipe. I spent a good 2 hours in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, simmering the broth, making sure everything was perfect. I poured my love into that pot, the way a parent does, hoping to show my son how much I cared. When Mark came home from work, he was in one of his moods. I could tell the moment he walked through the door. His shoulders were hunched, his jaw tight. He barely grunted a greeting. I asked him about his day, trying to draw him out, but he just waved me off, heading straight to his room. I sighed, familiar with this routine. I warmed up a bowl of the soup and brought it to him in the living room, where he was already engrossed in his phone, ignoring the television that blared some sports game. "Here you go, son," I said gently, placing the bowl on the coffee table in front of him. "Your favorite. I made it just for you." He grunted again, not even looking up. He took a spoonful, tasted it, and then his face twisted. "Dad," he said, his voice sharp, full of irritation. "What is this? It tastes like dishwater." My heart sank. "What do you mean, son? It's your favorite. Chicken and vegetable. I followed your mother's recipe exactly." He put the spoon down with a clatter. "It has no salt, Dad. Absolutely no salt. It's bland, it's tasteless, it's disgusting." I felt a flush of heat rise to my face. I had been so careful. I must have forgotten the salt, or perhaps not put enough. I'd been a little forgetful lately. "I'm so sorry, Mark," I said, reaching for the salt shaker on the table. "I must have forgotten. Here, Let me add some for you.
But he snatched the shaker away from me. No. It's ruined.
It's absolutely ruined. How can you be so useless, Dad? You can't even make a simple soup right. His words felt like a physical blow. Useless.
That word echoed in my mind.
I stared at him, my mouth open, unable to believe what I was hearing. Mark, I started, my voice trembling. That's not fair.
I spent hours making that for you. I just made a small mistake. But he wasn't listening.
He pushed the bowl away, sloshing some of the soup onto the table.
A small mistake? This is typical, Dad.
You're always making mistakes.
You're always messing things up.
I work hard all day, I come home tired, and I expect a decent meal, not this slop.
And that's when it happened.
I don't know what came over him, or what finally snapped inside me. Perhaps it was the accumulation of years of his entitlement, his disrespect, his constant criticism. Perhaps it was the word useless, echoing the insecurities I sometimes felt as a lonely widower. I stood there, frozen, as he stood up, his face red with rage. He was much taller, much stronger than me now. He leaned over me, his voice a low growl.
You know what, Dad? You're just a burden.
A useless, old burden.
And then he shoved me. Hard.
I stumbled back, my feet getting tangled. And I fell. My head hit the armrest of the armchair with a sickening thud. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment, the world spun.
He didn't stop there.
As I lay on the floor, dazed, he stood over me, his shadow looming. Get up, you old fool, he yelled. Clean up your mess. He kicked the coffee table, sending the bowl of soup flying, splashing hot liquid onto my arm.
I cried out, more from shock than pain.
Then, he grabbed my arm, yanking me up, and I heard a sickening crack.
My wrist. It twisted at an unnatural angle.
I gasped, tears springing to my eyes, not just from the pain, but from the realization.
My own son. He was hurting me. Physically hurting me.
The boy I had cradled, the one whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose feverish forehead I had cooled.
This was him now. A stranger consumed by rage.
He slapped me across the face, a sharp, stinging blow that left my cheek throbbing. My glasses flew off, clattering to the floor.
I could taste blood in my mouth.
Don't you ever talk back to me like that again, he roared. He stood there, breathing heavily, looking down at me as I crouched on the floor, clutching my throbbing wrist, my face stinging. The room was silent save for his heavy breathing and my ragged gasps. Then, as if a switch flipped, he seemed to calm down. The rage drained from his face, replaced by a strange, almost vacant expression. He looked at the mess, at me, and then back at the TV. Clean this up, he muttered, as if nothing had happened, and walked back to his room, slamming the door shut. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, the pain in my wrist radiating up my arm, the humiliation burning in my chest.
My glasses were broken. My lip was cut. My arm was scalded.
But the worst injury was invisible, etched into my soul.
My son had beaten me. Over soup.
Over salt. The sheer, terrifying absurdity of it was overwhelming. I slowly, painfully, picked myself up. I cleaned the mess on the floor, tears streaming silently down my face.
I couldn't stop them.
The image of his contorted face, his angry eyes, replayed in my mind.
How could my son do this to me?
I went to the bathroom, looked at my bruised face in the mirror. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. This wasn't just about a physical beating, it was about the shattering of a lifetime of trust, of love, of sacrifice.
I called Sarah. I didn't know who else to call.
I just needed to hear a kind voice, someone who would believe me.
She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. Hi, Mr. Henderson.
Everything okay?
I tried to speak, but my voice was choked with sobs.
Sarah. I managed to croak. Something terrible happened. She was at the house within 20 minutes, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of deep concern the moment she saw my face, my swollen wrist wrapped in a dish towel. She rushed to my side, her eyes wide with horror.
Mr. Henderson, what happened?
What on earth? I told her everything, haltingly, through tears, about the soup, the salt, the rage, the shove, the slap. She listened, her face growing paler and paler. When I finished, she was crying too, holding my hand, gently examining my wrist.
We need to go to the hospital, she said firmly. This looks bad. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. A choice that would change everything, forever. My own son, the one I had devoted my life to, had physically assaulted me, his elderly father, over a trivial matter. The physical pain was immense, but the emotional pain was even worse. It felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, my understanding of my own family, my own child, utterly shattered. Before I tell you what happened next, what I decided to do, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. What would you do if your child, your flesh and blood, raised their hand to you in such a horrific way? Would you forgive them? Would you try to understand? Or would you make them face the consequences, no matter how painful? Because the decision I made was one of the hardest of my life, and I still grapple with it every single day. Sarah took me to the emergency room. It turned out my wrist was fractured in 2 places, and I had a mild concussion from hitting my head. There were also significant bruises on my arm and face. The doctor, a kind young woman, looked at me with deep concern. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly, "these injuries, they look like domestic abuse. Is someone hurting you?" I hesitated. How could I say it? How could I tell a stranger that my own son, Mark, the son I loved more than life itself, had done this? Sarah, however, didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, unwavering, despite her tears. "His son did this to him." My heart ached, but a part of me felt a flicker of relief that someone else was finally acknowledging the truth. The hospital staff contacted the police, as they are mandated to do in such cases. 2 officers arrived, listened to my story, and took statements. It was excruciating. Describing Mark's rage, his words, his actions, felt like tearing open fresh wounds with every sentence. Sarah was a rock. She stood by me, confirmed everything, and held my hand throughout the entire ordeal. The officers explained my options. I could press charges. I could get a restraining order. I could have him removed from the house. They were very clear about the seriousness of the situation and the potential for further harm if nothing was done. I looked at Sarah, then down at my bandaged wrist, at my reflection in the mirror showing my bruised face. I thought about all the years, all the love, all the sacrifices. And I thought about the word useless. The slap. The shove. The sheer contempt in his eyes. This wasn't a one-off mistake born of anger. This was a culmination of years of disrespect, escalating to violence. I knew, deep down, that if I didn't do something, it would only get worse. He needed to face the consequences of his actions. He needed to understand that there are boundaries that cannot be crossed, even with family. "I want to press charges," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but firm. Sarah squeezed my hand. The officers nodded, their expressions grim but understanding. They explained the process. When we got back to the house, Mark was gone. Sarah had called him while I was being examined, asking him to meet us there. He hadn't answered. The officers advised me not to interact with him alone, given the recent violence. They said they would pick him up at work. And they did. The next day, I received a call from the police station. Mark had been arrested. He was charged with assault and battery. It was a surreal, heartbreaking phone call. I heard his voice on the phone when the officer allowed him to speak to me, full of anger, then confusion, then a desperate pleading. "Dad. What did you do? Why are you doing this to me?" It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? My broken wrist, my bruised face, my shattered heart, a misunderstanding? I hung up, unable to listen to his self-pity any longer. Sarah stayed with me for a few days, helping me with meals and chores, making sure I was okay. She was incredibly supportive, but I could see the pain in her eyes too. She loved Mark, despite his flaws, and this was tearing her apart. She tried to visit him, to talk to him, but he refused to see her, blaming her for taking my father's side. The legal process was slow and painful. Mark refused to admit guilt, insisting it was an accident, that I had fallen, that he hadn't meant to hurt me. His lawyer, a shrewd man, tried to paint me as an overly sensitive elderly man, exaggerating the situation. But the police report, the hospital records, and Sarah's testimony were undeniable. They also found text messages on Mark's phone where he had complained to friends about me, calling me a burden and an old fool, reinforcing the pattern of disrespect. Eventually, facing overwhelming evidence, Mark took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of battery,
received a suspended sentence, and was ordered to attend anger management classes. Most importantly, a permanent restraining order was issued against him. He was forbidden from coming within a certain distance of my home or contacting me. The house felt incredibly quiet after that. The silence was deafening, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of peace. The heavy weight of his presence, his moods, his demands, was gone. Sarah eventually broke off her engagement with Mark. She told me she couldn't marry someone who was capable of such violence, especially towards his own father. She continued to visit me, though, still checks in on me.
She's become like the daughter I never had.
We talk, we share meals, we even go for walks in the park. She sometimes says she still loves Mark, but that she knows she deserves better, and that I deserve better.
It's been 6 months now.
My wrist has healed, mostly. The physical scars are fading, but the emotional ones, they remain. I haven't spoken to Mark since that phone call from the police station. He hasn't tried to contact me, probably because of the restraining order, or perhaps he just doesn't care.
I don't know. I often wonder if I made the right choice. Was it too harsh? Did I condemn my son to a life of bitterness and resentment?
Or did I save myself, and perhaps even him, from a cycle of escalating violence? I miss the son I thought I had, the one who would laugh at my bad jokes, the one who would hug me goodbye. But I don't miss the monster who stood over me, his face contorted with rage, hitting me because of a lack of salt in his soup. Sometimes, I still hear that word, useless, echoing in my mind. But then I look around my peaceful home, I look at the garden blooming, and I realize that I am not useless. I am a survivor. I am a man who, after years of giving and sacrificing, finally stood up for himself. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing. Subscribe for more stories like this, where people are pushed to their absolute limits and have to make impossible choices. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below.
I truly need to hear from you all. What would you have done? Would you have forgiven him? Would you have pressed charges? I'll see you all in the next story.